Hi, everyone. Welcome to our seventh Made Web Series session of 2021. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have our featured speaker with us today. Marcelo Galdieri is with us. He is the SVP of Digital Experiences at National Geographic, where he's responsible for digital and mobile products worldwide, including all websites, apps, and new digital experiences. Today, he'll talk about how this 130-year-old company is transitioning from a print-first publication to a digital subscription business. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that you should be on mute. Marcelo will take questions throughout, so feel free to use the chat function if you'd like to ask one. Or if you want to come off mute to ask your question directly, just use the hand raise function. I'll call on you and then you can take yourself off mute. All right. Thanks so much, Marcelo. Why don't you take it away?
With that, let me go and talk a little bit, because I'm super happy to talk about this thing that is, you will hear, if you meet anybody from National Geographic, you will hear the sentence that we are working to grow from reverence to relevance a lot, because this is the main thing that's been in our minds for years now. It's what we've been working towards for a long time. And what do we mean by that is that I bet you that when all of you heard that we're going to see a presentation from National Geographic, what came to your mind was something like this, right? A stack of magazines that your parents or your grandparents had in the living room, etc. That's the first thing that comes to all of our minds, right? Because that is the reality, right? We've been a magazine first company for 120 of our 133 years, right? And this is great, right? We are super happy that people still have this reference for National Geographic. When you talk that you work here, you can see people's eyes goes like, oh, wow, that is so cool, right? But when was the last time any of you had one of these magazines with you, right? And that is the thing that I mentioned, or even when is it that you watch our linear channel, right? That's what we mean by going from reverence to relevance, right? It's how do we take consumers that love us and make sure that we still are relevant to them? How do we don't end up like Kodak or Polaroid? Everybody's like, oh, those, I remember those, they were great, but they don't exist anymore. We want to continue to exist, for another 100+ years, right? And the good thing about it is that we've been here for a while. We've been doing a lot of things. We've been seeing a lot of things for all of these years. We've been exploring the world and illuminating this, the wonders of this planet, right? We've been telling these stories. We were the first ones, I bet you didn't know that we were the first ones that actually published photographs on a magazine, especially photographs of animals at night. We had to create the camera in 1906 to publish these photos, right? Because we were basically a scientific journal until then. And that's when we started this whole idea of like using visual to really tell our stories, right? And National Geographic was the first one to do that. National Geographic was the first expedition to reach the North Pole and tell about it, right? It was National Geographic that found Machu Picchu and the Titanic, right? We're the ones that did it and brought all of these things to life. In the US, we wrote the draft legislation that created national parks, right? And depending on your age, you might recognize, Jacques Cousteau and Diane Fossey, who were National Geographic explorers, right? More recently, we have this guy on the bottom right there that he made a small movie called Avatar, right? James Cameron, that he is also a National Geographic explorer. He was the first person to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench, by himself. And all of this comes from us funding these scientists, these photographers, these explorers to go there, look at the world, and bring these stories back to us so that we can spread these stories and help inform, engage, and inspire you to want to know about this product and what is your role on it in this planet and how you can understand it. Because we believe that when you understand and create an emotional connection with the environment, with the planet, with Earth, that you will care more deeply for it, right? And that's kind of like what we've been doing it for all these years, But the challenge that we have right now is that we come from a print magazine and television, And consumers' behaviors are changing a lot, right? The how people consume stories, how they listen to stories have been changing drastically in the last few years. So our role is really to say, how can we help, how can we churn that, how can we adapt into these new consumer trends and start talking to them, right? Because how as a brand, we stay consistent to who we are, right? And at the same time, continue to be relevant in the eyes of the consumers, right? That's the challenge that we have in front of us, that we've been chipping at it, right? What's on our side is that we're storytellers, right? And as a species, we're addicted to it. The means of telling the stories might change, but everybody still wants good stories. So how can we bring that, right? Until 1906, National Geographic was not known for photography. Today, you think of National Geographic, immediately comes to mind, oh my God, yeah, photography. We weren't, right? On the contrary, when we started publishing photos on our magazine in 1906, some of our board members resigned, right? Because we were becoming, we were no longer a scientific journal. We were becoming pamphlets, right, by telling stories this way, right? So I think that we, as storytellers, we need to continue to do that. And whatever new format of story becomes, we want to be there as well, right? We want to be able to say, now we're known for photography. 50 years from now, it might be holograms. We have to be great at holograms, right? We have that. And that's how we can, become relevant to consumers as we go, right? And what is driving that change on consumer behavior is, number one, the fact that consumers' attention span is decreasing, right? When we think about when the printing press came up, books were the big thing, and then we went for newspapers, whose articles were a little bit smaller, and then we went to that blog phase, in the 90s and the 2000s, when it was even less, and then now it was Twitter, which is not even, we don't count in words, we count in characters, right? The attention span. And now we're going into Instagram or memes where words are even optional, right? So the attention, there's this great research from the Mobile Marketing Association. It says the consumers actually spend an average of like 1.5 seconds per image that they see when they're scrolling, right? And you need to get their attentions on those 1.5 seconds as the image goes by, right? So we need to adapt to that. How do we do that? Because writing a 9,000 word article still appeals to some people, but it might not be relevant to the majority of the people that we're talking to, right? And honestly, we like to compare ourselves to the New York Times, and the Atlantic, and Scientific American. That's not it, right? Consumers now we are competing for people's attention against Netflix and Fortnite. And if you ask my kids, it's Roblox, right? That is where people are choosing to spend their time. So I need to be prepared to not to think necessarily as, let's say, linear storytellers. And I need to think different on how do I engage the consumers, right? And the way we've been doing this in the last few years is that we're focusing on 5 steps that I'm going to go through with all of, right? It's changing how we talk to them, where we talk to consumers, what type of stories we talk, and how do we reach consumers as broadly as we can, right? So with that, I'm going to start these. And again, as I mentioned before, interrupt me if you have any questions. My idea is that I'll go through this relatively quickly on the time that we have together, so that we also have time in the end for questions if you have any. Okay. So the first step is we need to build a presence where consumers are. Like, it was easy for us in a way in the past when it was about print magazines, because you would find us, everywhere that you go. Newsstands that still existed, and people were still going to airports, right? So you would see us everywhere. Our National Geographic channel was one of about, 100 or so, right? That you had on your cable box. So it was easy for consumers to find us, but that's not typically where we are, right? So how do we build that? And the first thing we needed to do is re-edit all of our stories for the places where consumers actually are. So as I mentioned, it's like we still write, thousand words articles for our magazine, but how do I turn that into an Instagram story? How do I take that as same story and re-edit it completely so that it becomes a Facebook post or a video on YouTube, right? Not even necessarily the channel, but how do I make that into a YouTube format, right? And how do I turn that in again and put it on? Now we're experimenting with TikTok, right? You can find us in there. And that work of not just copy pasting what we're doing, but how do I think about the re-editing and what is the consumer frame of mind when they are on these channels that is occupying the majority of the time? It's very important. The way you watch something on YouTube is different from what you watch on your television or on Disney Plus. So I need to tell the story in that different way. It takes a heck of a lot of work to re-edit the same story multiple times. But this is one of the things that we are proud to do, is exactly to try to do that. And it allows us also to try new formats, right? We have some, if you haven't seen it yet, check out all of the AR experiences that we have on Instagram, because that's where we're saying, how can I play with that format? So if I'm talking about how a story that we had recently of where we installed the highest weather station on Earth on the top of Mount Everest to really measure the effects of climate change, from that perspective. And we just installed another one in Chile now to measure the same thing on the southern hemisphere. But that story became a video, a completely different video on YouTube. It became an AR experience on Instagram, because that was how we could relate to the people on that channel, right? So we're doing that, and you will see on TikTok is the same thing. We are still trying, what is this format, right? How do I turn that into our stories into that format, which has a very different tone of voice in a way, right? On that, and how I tell these stories. We're still learning. We're trying different formats to see what works and what not, and what resonates with the audience. The other example of re-editing our stories is that we have our podcast, Overheard, and it was a huge debate internally, because we're a visual company, right? So again, when you think of National Geographic, think of photos. What is the audio version of that, right? When you have zero images to display, right? So how can I tell that story in a way that transports you to that place, that you would imagine, that I can paint that picture in your mind so that you feel that you're in that place and you feel you're there with that explorer. And I can do that and create a visual that I'm not showing you, but I'm making you think of it, right? So that's the first thing we need to do, is rethink and re-edit our stories to be in the places where consumers are, right? And just go beyond that headline, oh, we need to be where the consumers are. What is the work behind it to get there, right? The second one that we learned is that we are passionate about being National Geographic, right? And we talk about Nat Geo, et cetera. But at the same time, nobody wants to hear from us, right? They want to hear from people, right? And the basic example that we have about this is our Instagram, where we said, okay, Instagram, that's perfect for us. We know how to do this. We know photography. That is exactly the channel of Instagram is made for us, right? And we were there, we were bobbing about, and we were doing great, but nothing tremendous for it. And then one day, I remember, even when I joined, I was talking with one of our photographers in Italy in 2017, and I was like, what are the things that how you see, your photography on Instagram? And they said, actually, you know what, the challenge that we have, she said, I'm in this panda rescue place in China, and I'm taking these amazing pictures. Then I'm sending to an editor in DC who will take that story and will write its own caption about it, right? But they weren't there, right? So what are the stories really that you can say, right? And that moment, a light bulb went in our heads. And the way we did it is we shifted around and said, let's not us talk about this. We need to let our photographers talk about it. So in the beginning, we literally gave the password to our account to 100 or so photographers, right? Now we have a more information security safe way to do that, but we let our photographers post the picture and write the captions. Because now all of a sudden you're not following photos from National Geographic, you're following our photographers and the stories that they're bringing behind those photos. And the minute we churned that around to focus not on us, but to focus on the people, we became the largest brand on social media, right? And especially on Instagram. We're the largest. Nike is the number 2 on Instagram, like half of the people that we have, right? Because if you look at this slide of the top Instagram accounts, you don't see, again, it's not about the brands, it's about the people. You're following these personalities, these people in order to. So I warned you all. You're following those other people, and we realize that that's how we can turn it around. Focusing on the people, learn from our photographers directly, not what National Geographic has to say, but what Corey Richards, what's the story that Corey Richards behind, that the photograph that he took. Any questions while I pause for my dogs to take a break?
Anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the other thing that we had to do is rethink how we come up with our stories, right? And it's hard because, again, for over a century, we had a very clear approach of how we tell our stories, which is I write them down or I shoot the video. And when I'm done with that, first of all, when I write those, I'm done. But more importantly, the formatting, the layouting of the story, the whole thing has to come first from that print mentality, right? And that's a challenge for us because we have, this is one example, right? That when our teams are thinking through this from a print perspective, they will come up with these amazing graphs, they'll come up with these amazing designs for our magazine, literally award-winning around the world, But that is not the way you consume media, right? You're not the one that will think first of the magazine, right? You will find us on social media first, on our website, on Apple News Plus, on our app, right? So we have to stop thinking of I'm going to write a magazine and I'm going to put it online. And I need to think of how do I take these stories and I write for the web first. I'm going to put these stories in front of you online. And you know what? At the end of the month, I'm going to take those best stories that worked. I'm even going to print them out and I'm going to mail it to your house, right? So it's the other way around this, right? That I need to think. It doesn't start from that. And the result of that, and unfortunately, I was trying to do this as a video. I recommend you look at this on our website. But we took this same story, for example, that we had with the photographs of this one street in LA, right? That if you follow the street from north to south, it starts super green on the rich neighborhoods. And as you go down the street, the number of trees go down as the median cost of a house goes down. And the median income level of the people who live in that neighborhood changes, right? So we're seeing how this issue that we're having of increased heat, on especially on the west of the United States, is impacting in disproportionate way depending on your level of income, right? So this is a great story to put it on the visual on the cover of a magazine. But when we brought it digitally, you literally see our camera going across the street from end to end, right? So we filmed the whole street and we put it to you. And then we'll this is zone A, look how it looks. This is where they are. Now look at zone B, which has a different way in zone C and zone D in terms of income, average income level on those streets. So it becomes a lot more immersive in the way you're seeing because all of us are now a lot more interested on video than we are on the written words. So that's how we were able to do it. But if you look at before, when we were building these stories, we would send, a writer and a photographer to go there, interview people, get the story, write it down, take some nice, amazing photos, come back, and we'll print it. Now we need to send a cinematographer together to film this all, right? And the story has to start from that digital beginning, from a video storytelling first. Then I can build out this type of digital experience And from there, I can extract as well onto an article. But it's a huge cultural shift for all of us, right? And it's a completely different way of thinking. It sounds really nice now that we're getting it a bit better, you know. When I talk to all of you now after years of working on this, it's like, oh, of course, it sounds like the logical thing to do, but it's been very hard to get the culture to change towards that. Right? Everybody. The fourth part is related to this, and also a huge culture change that we're going through, that we're still struggling with this a little bit, right? It's that consumers, all of you, expect a two-way conversation, not a monologue anymore, right? And as I mentioned, we're a company that comes from print and digital and television, sorry. And then one thing that comes from that is that if you're a writer, you will write your story, it goes in a magazine, I'm done, I'm gonna move to my next story. I finish an episode of or a show, a Disney Plus or linear, I put it on air, great, I move to the next one. That doesn't work on the digital world, especially the one I'm in, right? The minute you put a product out, that's where the interaction begins. It's not the end of the story. That's when I need to start iterating. That's when I need to start engaging. That's when I need to start talking to all of the consumers. And I need to have that conversation ongoing, right? And that is one of the challenges that we need to learn, is that I need to continue to have that conversation. That's how, by having that ability for you to talk to us directly, is where we can create a much bigger bond, and it can become more relevant to you. We had this, you can go, for example, to one of our one of our products, which is called Field Notes, where you can see our explorers on the field writing their stories, and you can follow on a map and the photos, etc. And you can actually go there and comment and hear back directly from our photographers, directly from our explorers, right? That type of engagement is something that we need to learn as a company to get there, because that's where the deeper connection with our consumers come from, right? And that's the part that we're really interested on building. And so I just saw my little thing pop up that you guys have a question, right? So let me see, what are the benefits besides change in terms of the transaction changing? Oh, I can answer that like from, there is a lot more. So if shameless plug, if you check our magazine, you'll see that we have like multiple stories about how is it that there's not a significant change in the numbers of like oxygen itself, but there is an air quality of the area, right? And not only the air quality, but also the livelihood on the place where you are, right? The neighboring trees definitely is a thing that we're seeing, that having that kind of canopy and that coverage, it's become not only it improves the air quality, but also improves the quality of living, is the term I was looking for, right? Overall for everybody, especially if you think about it, the people that depend on public transportation, that have to wait on a bus stop to go there, and there's no canopy, there's no trees, etc. So it just compounds over and over. The next one they do add it. The other one I want to take, the final one, is that the one that we've been working the hardest on recently, is that we cannot think, yes, we need to be where consumers are. Yes, we need to have conversations with everybody. Yes, but we need to stay true to the brand and our core businesses. But how do I reach you through all of these touch points that you're interested in, right? So the latest example, and we call this internally 360-degree storytelling. So I take this example of the work that for 3 years, one of our explorers, Brian Scarry, has been documenting whales around the planet, and how amazing they are, and how their culture is, and how they learn, how do they teach their calves and all of that. And that story, which in the past would just simply become an article on our magazine, right? Now is a series as well on Disney Plus that you can watch, right? And now it's also a book that we're selling with all of this images. And by the way, if you want to hear more about directly from Brian Scary and see what he's doing, you can go and go to one of our NG Live events, and hear directly from him. And we'll consolidate all of this in this digital hub, which is going to tell you the stories from the magazine, complementary stories, some of the teas of the book, and where you can go to watch them, right? All of our stories, we start to think of that. What are all of the, how do I touch you everywhere? And not to mention the whole social media elements of it as well. So how do I make sure that I'm reaching you consistently and on brand on all of these touch points, right? We did something similar last year with Women of Impact, right? The same thing. We said, here's the story in the magazine. We had a TV show. We created a Facebook group where we can talk about it and create a community around it. And we have all of these. So more and more, you will see us coming consistently across all of these touch points, because that's, in a way, is how I'm going to make sure that I can reach you in any place that you might be. But all of these places is not just a touch point for me to tell my story, but it's a door for you to come into the Nat Geo world, right? At the end of it, what I want from a relationship with our consumers is for you to go from just scrolling, on our social media feeds, to then you go and say, hey, you know what? I want to know more about that. Let me give you my email. And then from there, you can become a subscriber of ours. So you can get even more exclusive content and promotions across all of these other lines of businesses that we have, right? And the idea is, like, we want you, when we talk internally about becoming a lifestyle brand, right? How do I do that? It's because we see that there are a large group of people that not only they relate to us as a brand, but that our brand can become part of who they are, right? So if you are adventurous, if you're a traveler, if you're a curious person, you want to say, I am National Geographic, who I am, part of who I am, it's part of this identity that I have, right? And that's where this is 360-degree storytelling allows you to get in touch and live that aspect across any means that you have with us, right? Again, it's a lot of work, right? It's not as easy as it sounds on a keynote slide, but it's fundamental for us to be able to continue to be relevant to you instead of just revered by consumers, right? And let's be honest, oh, great, beautiful slides, great idea. Does this work? Is this like just new? But is it resonating from a business and consumer perspective? And our argument is it is, because if you look from a brand perspective, this is what we had, in the 1990s, before we start, early 2000s actually, before we started doing this work of identifying who is our consumer, how do I become in digital, how do I become grow. These are the shows that we have. My favorite one is Ice Holes. It's like, this is that we didn't know enough who we were as a company and how to do this. So we just started chasing the competition with reality shows, right? And now, not only that I know who I am from a brand perspective, but I know how to reach out to all of you, I can do much better, right? I'm doing much better already. Now, all of a sudden, I have the liberty, and I still are relevant, and I'm still consistent, I'm still on brand, even if I do a game show. But because a game show is about how your brain works. I can do a cooking show, but it's not about this guy screaming at people on the kitchen. It's about him going around the world and finding out how other cultures, cook, etc. I can do hard-hitting stories like traffic, or I can do lighthearted ones like Jeff Goldblum, and it still is on brand, it's still relevant. And all of a sudden, I can take that breath, and all of a sudden, you might walk away from Fortnite because I have something that is appealing for you in the right channel, in the right format, for you, that you will be coming into it. this is what allows us to become the as I mentioned, number one brand in social media with 500, more than 500 million followers, right? It allowed us to, the whole publishing industry is going down, linears is going down with cord cutting. It allows us to turn, right? We reverse that historical trend, and we're getting more people to join our geographic and join us, right? It allows us to be much more profitable in that sense of like being able to really attract people that wants to engage with us on a recurring revenue perspective, right? And we're just looking forward in the future to, to really turbocharging this as we become part of a more integrated in the Disney company, to be able to reach out to all of you through Disney Plus, through parks, through et cetera, so that we can be more consumer touch points to tell our stories on a consistent way. I had this amazing video to show you all. I will have to send it to you all later, because when I try to play it on Zoom, it gets on, stuttering all of it. So I hope that I'll find a way to send it so you can all watch it later. But in the meantime, how can I help and answer any of the questions?
You do have a question in the chat.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it out loud?
Yeah, I just got the screen to pop up here. So how do I fill the same piece of digital? What is for different age brackets? One of the interesting, and I'll get to that part, and then I'll get to the adaptive storytelling. One of the things that was interesting is that a couple of years ago, we had this huge issue internally that we said, listen, National Geographic is only for old people. Our average consumer, is 60 plus years old. Those are the people that still buy magazines, etc. And we said, actually, no, because only old people read print magazines, and only old people still watch a linear television, right? That's the difference. I used this example that we took this one show that we had, that was One Strange Rock with Will Smith. When we showed that show, when we aired that show on linear channel for the first time, you're right, absolutely, the age was exactly as we expected, above 50, high 50s, 60s, etc. Then we took that same show and we put it on, at the time was Netflix, because this was before Disney Plus. So we put it there. And all of a sudden we saw that we had the same level of audience, but all of a sudden that age dropped all the way to, the 38, 39, right? And we took that same story and we broke it into little pieces that we put it like in YouTube and social media to address that. And then all of a sudden we had the same level of audience, but with consumers that were on the 20s. So our stories resonate, right? This piece of content, be it digital or be it video or being a long written story, they resonate as long as you do the work of putting that in the channels that have a younger audience, and channel in the voice that the younger audience is looking for, right? So that is one other example that we have. We had this amazing story about a woman that had a full face transplant, right? And that whole experience of her, and we stayed with her for like 2 years as she went through the whole operation, how she recovered, and what it was, the idea of gaining a face again, right? And people looking at you and you being able to be proud of that. And we did all of that story, but same day, that story worked on really well on our print, but it was a 30-minute show that we aired on our channel and then later lived on YouTube. And then we took that same story and created a 22-chapter Instagram story focused on teen suicide prevention, which was a different angle to it, right? And that was for years was our most watched, Instagram story, because we talked about that in that format that resonated and with angle that resonated with those consumers, right? So that's the work that you need to do to reach all of the age brackets. And that's where we just changed from going technical a little bit from the adaptive design storytelling. Yes, we had to move all our production to, from a digital perspective, to what we call a headless CMS, right? So a CMS that writers just write your story here. Don't worry as much about the layout. And let's have this tool reformat as the same story shows on our mobile app, shows on Apple News Plus, shows on our website, and goes into the printing process, for layouting. It's hard for our teams because they're used to be very on hands on the layouting of the story. And we're telling them, you're going to have to let the tool do some of the layouting for you, so that we don't have to specifically handcraft each story 5, 6, 7 times. But we're using that tool in order to create more of that adaptive storytelling, depending on the channel that the story flows to.
Okay. Malna, you have a question? You can go ahead and go off mute.
Okay, thank you. It was very nice to listen to your presentation, Marcelo. So thank you so much for giving us so much insight into what National Geographic is doing. My question is, what would you say was the hardest platform to work with in terms of transitioning these stories into content that the users on that platform would want to digest?
The one that I say that we're learning still the most right now is TikTok, right? The feedback that we're getting, like the stories that we think are going to do great, not necessarily do, and the ones that we think, yeah, let's see how it goes, they do great, right? We're still learning a little bit more about, do we focus on the subject or we focus on the person, right? Do we do high production or low production, right? So those are the things that we're still learning. So one example that we had is like when we announced the naming of the fifth ocean, right? The video that we did, it was just our geographer standing in front of a virtual background of a map, right? Talking directly to the camera. I'm like, yeah, maybe that would do okay. It's our best view story so far, right, on TikTok. And we're like, what happened there, right? Is this literally is just this white dude talking in front of him? We thought this was not the one that we wanted to be amazing, but we learned is about the production value. People on TikTok, because of the informal nature of what you see there, it just resonates more to that audience, right? So that's the one that we're still learning more, right, and finding and trying new things as we go along. The one that took more internal leap of faith was the podcast, because we are such a visual company. And that discussion of like, how do we translate ourselves into just audio, right? And what is it? What stories do we tell? There's like hundreds of thousands of podcasts, right? What is the one that will resonate with people? That is the one that took us a lot more internal. It's like, okay, let's do this, right? We got to try it because there's enough consumers interested on that. But it wasn't then comfortable from internally, right, to explore that. And now we're doing, we're doing quite well on it. We're expanding our podcast lineup, et cetera, to explore more of that area.
Okay, that was a great.
The biggest challenge. Sorry, last thing that is interesting. The challenge that we have right now is like, when is it that you jump into these new storytelling formats? Which ones of them will become a fad? Which ones of them will become right? So we had so many debates about Clubhouse, for example. Do we get into Clubhouse or not, right? And we're like, we don't know yet. Let's wait and see how it goes. Let's keep an eye. Let's follow. Let's brainstorm what would be our footprint there, et cetera. But we're not sure yet if how is it going to work? If it's going to work there, is it going to work on Twitter? It's going to work on, everybody has a Clubhouse clone at the moment. Where is it going to work? But we're keeping an eye on it because it's expensive to just try new things, right? And just jump into these things. We had a relatively big team working on Snapchat for a while, and we're not doing Snapchat anymore because we didn't see the scale that we needed to justify the investment to be there, right? So that's the other balance that we have to do across P and all of these platforms. And sorry, Shantia, I hope I got your name right. You were going to say and I interrupted you.
No worries. It is Shanti. You got it right. And thank you for this great presentation. My question is more towards like shifting storytelling to focus on people rather than the brands, because a lot of the companies we've been talking to are talking about this people focus, like across different categories too. So I wanted to know, like, how does like the work experience and like the tasks that you guys complete change with this shift to like focus on people? And even like when it comes to hiring new employees and stuff, did the qualities and the things you look for in these employees change too, with the focus on people rather than the brand?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that we still have a lot to do there. I think that we are still working a lot more of how do we put people front and center, and how do we put the right people front and center that really represents our audience, right? I think that's the other thing that it's been very top of mind for us, is that we, for the longest time, we were not putting enough of people from racial, geographic, gender diversity. We have to do. We're doing a little bit more of that, right? So it does change a little bit. Not necessarily. Yeah, we do need to do better, like on hiring, et cetera, of people with more diverse backgrounds, et cetera. But it changes how we identify the talent, right? And how do we train the people that come in, right? I'll give you one example of our explorers, right? We have about 700 active explorers at the moment of our database of like over 3,000 explorers, right? Those, again, photographers, scientists, archaeologists, submarine pilots, everybody that you can think of that work for National Geographic. We're doing a lot more work on teaching them storytelling, right? Because as I mentioned to some of them in the past, it's like you might go and spend 2 years in this cave, in this ocean, on this forest, on this mountain, right? Doing amazing scientific work. When you come back, if all you have is a spreadsheet, it's going to be hard to tell that story, right? And I'm sure your spreadsheet is an absolutely great scientific journal that you can publish on Nature and win awards, etc. I can't tell that story, right? I don't have enough. So we're literally training all of you to say, this is how you do it. We need photos. This is how you pilot a drone, right? Like, for example, we're teaching them how to do that. We're teaching them how to present their stories. We're telling them like to make sure to document how you got there in a way that can be turned into something that is entertaining as well, right? We have some of our research shows that a lot of times some of the stories that we tell was very professorial, right, and academic. So we cannot be broccoli, right? We need to be entertaining as well if we're competing with Netflix and Fortnite. So we need to be able to tell the stories in a different way. So by doing that additional training, not only improving on the hiring, but doing the training, now all of a sudden I have this group of talents coming up, right, that I can leverage. Right now I have these people that I can't put in front of the camera and behind the camera to tell that stories, and I can do it. And I can tell a lot more of the work that all of this community that we have around the world is doing all this amazing work, which was hard for us for many years to extrapolate something out of that, right? So I think the focus is more, how do I develop the people that we have in order for them to be able to grow into it. If, again, second shameless plug, right? Listen to our Overheard episodes that is just coming out, where we're talking about this explorer that is a conservationist working in Nigeria to save this species of chimps that are about to go extinct in like 5 years if we don't do something, right? She was one of those that we had to train a little bit more for her to be able to tell that story. And if you'll see our Instagram story, it shows the footage, some of the footage that she did, et cetera. Even though she can't, these chimps are super afraid of humans, right? So she follows them through sounds more than videos. So it's not that she gets great videos, but she was able to turn that into a story that we can tell across platforms, right? That, I think, is a key part of this, is the talent development.
Okay, you have a question in the chat from Allison Choate.
Oh, Allison. Other brands that have made the pivots to digital. That's an interesting one. The one that I know that we almost say too much inside how like every presentation has to mandatorily talk about Apple, right? And that Geo, we mandatorily have to talk about the New York Times. I think that, again, they are our benchmark in terms of doing that transition, right? They're also 100+ years old, but they're doing such an amazing and inspiring work for us in terms of digital storytelling, right? Not only on getting their writers, their reporters to document in a way that is interesting. But the way they've been pushing the boundaries of how can I tell this story on a digital format, right? So we really have them as a benchmark of looking, say, look how they told this story. Look how they blended the story with interactives and how they blended. Like there was this, when was it? Not this weekend, a weekend ago, it was this amazing article about Joe Mitchell's that you scroll through it and it talked about that song that she did or that album that she did and had comments on the side, and it had the story that will play while you read it. And then you'll go to the next you will scroll and you will get to that next part, talk about the next album. You had the comments from different people on it, and you had that music playing on the background, right? That type of innovation of blending different mediums and different components into a digital storytelling, the work that they've been doing has been truly inspirational. We plan to steal a lot of their ideas, in the future.
That's great. Thank you. And that was a fantastic implementation on the Joni Mitchell piece. It was great.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we keep on checking them a lot. I mean, we are exactly on this point of it. We have a group of our employees exploring if we want to be on the forefront of digital storytelling, what is it that we have to do? What are the best out there, not only from the big ones, but the little ones around the world that we can look at it for inspiration? What do we want to do? So we're in the middle of that exercise right now. So.
Great. Any other questions? I know I have one. So have students on the call. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got to this position at National Geographic, and advice for students who are interested in following in your footsteps for them to do the same type of thing?
Sure. So yeah, I like to say that I grew up at MasterCard because I worked there for 20 years. I was a college hire and I stayed there for 20 years. Working mainly on products, product development, product management, product sales, with some stint on marketing on the consumer preference, right? And I only came to Nat Geo about four and a half years ago, mainly because I realized, oh my God, I only worked in one company my entire life. I need to have a different experience, right? And then I had one of my bosses at MasterCard had moved to Nat Geo, so she was a great reference when I applied for a job. Yes, hey, can you introduce me to the hiring manager? The two things that I like to tell everybody is, like, first of all, don't do what I did and spend too much time in one company. But I love MasterCard. They're still my family. I have so many examples there because I spent so many years. But the one thing I spend so many times in there is because the company was changing. When I joined, MasterCard was a non-profit association of banks, right? And now there's this huge, private company. And they also gave me the chance of working around the world, right? So they have this program, or at least they had when I was there, that you can apply for a job anywhere around the world. And they will, if you're the right person for the job, they will pay for your relocation. So the hiring manager can truly hire from anywhere around the world, right? So I'll always look for to be in a company that it's in the middle of an era, right? And entering a new era of its history, right? So again, MasterCard was in the history of going from nonprofits to private. And it was fascinating to have to see how you have to teach people how the company makes money, because nobody had to worry about that for decades, right? That's how it works there. So being part of that transformation helped a lot for me, not only to help shape the company, but also learn from that transition. The last thing I was there was the first time that we were launching first time doing a direct to consumer relationship, right? And it just
we cannot hear you. Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I ran out of battery on my headphones. So I was able to move into that role of the company was going to doing direct to consumer for the first time. So when you're looking for it, don't spend 20 years in the same company, but also look for those companies that are changing their moment, because that's when you're going to get to learn the most out of that transformation, right? And don't downplay the importance of networks, right? All of the changes that I was able to do is because somehow, somewhere, you had a connection in there that was a great reference, that thought of you when they needed help, and they said, "Hey, could you help me with this," etc. Don't underplay that. That is fantastic. I love the term of like, make sure that you're increasing the surface area of serendipity, right? By making sure you have enough contact with people on a broad area, because by having that network is when the opportunities show up, so make sure that you're expanding your surface area for these opportunities to show up, right? Especially now that we're all in Zoom and it's hard for us to meet up and network, you have to kind of fake the bumping in the hallway, right? Part of your work is to spend time and book 15 minutes to just catch up with people, right? Having that, it's important, because that's how you're going to increase your surface area of serendipity.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions?
Quick question: where can I learn more about like the fifth ocean? Because how is that possible in 2021? I saw it quickly on a meme site, but I didn't know it was real.
I will. So I'll reach out to Sarah to get your information, and I'll send it to you. Some of articles on how we came about and why do we decided to name a fifth ocean and define it. I'll send it to you, and I can send it to you, Sarah, and actually you can distribute to the rest of the team, so you can have it. I will have to say though that I made a lot of fun of our geographer in the time, because coming from outside of the U.S. I'm originally from Brazil, and like with European descent, so like, we always had 5 oceans, as I was growing up. So it's like, you Americans are only now catching up with us, So, in Latin America, and France, and Italy, there's always been 5 oceans. So it was kind of funny when they named it.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. I see one more on how are we on enterprise social ESG, right? We are, if you're thinking about enterprise social responsibility, as ESG, and I'm not confusing your acronyms, right? Because we have so many acronyms and at UN and Disney. But if you're talking about that, we've been always on, because we are so tied to illuminating and protect the wonder of our worlds. This has always been at the forefront of it, right? So we've been forever saying, let me show you what's happening in the world, right? And the way we do that is, as I mentioned in the beginning, we think that the more you understand the world and your role in it, and you create this emotional connection, the more you will care for it, right? So our job is really to inform, engage, and inspire you to know about what is happening, what is real, what is not, so that you can so you can care for it, and you ask, what can I do about it, right? What is it that I can do to change this, right? And it might be a matter of climate change. It might be, how you help people that are struggling on a certain part of the world, etc. We want to bring these stories, right? The one thing that we're kind of proud now is that now that we're part of this bigger conglomerate, right, of Disney, we get to have this, to be on the forefront and push the rest of our corporate parents towards that, right? So a lot of you see the policies that Nat Geo has go way far beyond, what Disney has, and they're adopting it. They're not killing us or downplaying us. And they just published their new 2030, enterprise social responsibility goals that we were an active part of, on helping and pushing that corporate company a little bit further out and say, no, you can be more ambitious here, right? Let's work on this. So that's how we see it, how the company is changing, is that we get this to make a much bigger impact, not only by reaching out to all of you and telling these stories and make you care for it, but also to help steer this gigantic corporation.
Anything else before we wrap up? Okay.
Right. You had on my last slide, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or emails. I'm happy to answer any more questions from all of you as we go. And thanks for your patience again with my dogs, with my earbuds going off of battery. So yeah, thank you.
No worries, Marcelo. We want to say thank you for the super interesting and engaging presentation. It really was amazing to hear about the digital transformation of such a beloved brand. And I know I'll be keeping out an eye for all the cool things you and your team are doing. And everyone in the audience, we did record today's session, so we'll be posting it to our website next week in case you want to rewatch it. And just a note about our next session, it will be on Wednesday, 7/21 at 6 p.m. Eastern, featuring Emily Pachuta. She's the Chief Marketing and Analytics Officer at Invesco. And she'll talk about how their partnership with the NCAA weaves creativity and data together to digitally engage with a whole new audience of college sports fans. Sounds like a really good one. That's it for now. Thank you guys for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.